Hi guys, I recently did an interview for an educational organization based on Burma. We talked about things like working in tech, being an international student, studying in the US, finding jobs after your school, the interview process in tech companies, and in general, like dealing with rejections and stuff like that. I thought it'd be cool to share with you guys in this channel. So hope you guys enjoy. As usual, the timestamps for the video are here. You can find them in the description below as well, especially because this is a long interview style video. So feel free to jump around to whichever section that you find interesting. Also, if you're new here, please consider subscribing because I make videos about software engineering and productivity that I think you guys will enjoy. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to roll the interview video. I hope you guys enjoy. Cheers.
So what was it like to work for Microsoft?
So it's awesome. I think initially it can be a little bit overwhelming. Like from something simple as like when you start, you'll be like, "Hey, this meeting's on building 50, right?" And then you're like, "Wait, which building am I on? 37. Where is building 50, right? Or building 137?" And just the sheer size where you have to like there's an internal shuttle system that you call to go to meetings and stuff. So like you get the
Wow.
sheer size of the company, how big it is. But at the same time, it's also awesome because that means that it's very diverse, right? Like not only in terms of people that are from all around the world, all walks of life, but also in terms of project diversity. Say you could work at the cloud, browser, Xbox, office, hardware, AR, VR, even you name it, like they've got it in their portfolio. So diversity was epic, that you could get involved in so many things, learn about so many new things, work with so many different people. Aside from that, I mean, another important reason that people consider like a top tech company is obviously your compensation package. They have like amazing compensation benefits, perks. They're known to have one of the best work-life balances as well. You know, you can work from home.
Wow.
Even before COVID, like it's totally acceptable for me to like do almost everything from home. I mean, yeah, people generally like going to work because like interactions with other people are awesome. But so yeah, overall, that's like you get a lot of benefits, a lot of perks. You learn amazing things. You work with like state-of-the-art technologies. But at the same time, you're also working in like a big company that everybody knows. You don't have, when you say I work at Microsoft, you don't really have to explain anybody. Like there's no follow-up question usually. Oh, tell me about your company kind of thing. So comes with a little bit of a clout as well. You can flex it a little bit.
Oh, definitely. I think it's a dream place for a lot of tech workers and to get into Microsoft or other giant companies. Like I said earlier, thank you for sharing that wonderful introduction. So I mean, there are a lot of students in obviously high school students, in Asia, Burma, Nepal, looking to come to US and pursue their major in tech or computer related majors. So what is your advice to those students?
I mean, it's great. I mean, I think it's maybe I'm a little bit biased, obviously, but I mean, tech in general is a great field. I often question myself as well, like how much studying like for a full degree in tech is even necessary these days, though, because like especially with like a lot of cloud development and everything being in the cloud, it's really easy to build something ground up as long as you have like a little bit of a problem solving and analytical thought process. Versus before, like if a lot of it was based on operating system hardware level engineering, so like computer science in general, algorithmic situations were really critical, which still are, but like because the majority of development now is like in web and more, it's more become software engineering these days, which you can really pick it up really fast on your own. That being said, if you want to work on like it's like a big tech company that's in US, that doesn't have like a office in like Burma or whichever country you're in, then the best bet generally tends to be studying here. Not you've studied here yourself, so I'll split that into two parts. Is like one, you will learn about engineering and technology from school. That's great. And then the second is eventually you'll be working with people that live in the US and you'll be working in an American company, hopefully. So you learn a lot of other things that you generally don't learn if you don't go to school. Like you socialize with a lot of different people, you learn about the culture. I think that to me was more valuable from a college standpoint than learning about the technical details, because those I was already interested in, right? Like I was already picking it up. So first advice if I would give is like, don't, when you think about studying in US, don't just take it as, okay, I need a job in computer science and I'm going to study the technical aspects from this school. Think about it as like, I want to experience living, learning, and like what the culture in US generally is. And I think that as a combination sets you up for more success than simply going and getting a computer science degree, right?
That makes sense. So like much more holistic approach as you just,
Yeah, and we went to liberal arts school too. So I every time I get a chance, I recommend everyone to take liberal arts school. And I'm not even Catholic, but I studied in a Catholic school and learned so much about the history and all that. I mean, if you just purely go as a software engineer, I wouldn't have learned a lot of diverse things that I'm aware of now. I think that shapes you as a person. I think that's important.
Definitely.
So
I mean, with everything going on, like people personalizing things, customization, I think, it's great to understand people. You're working with people, right? So I think you have to understand people for sure. So, I mean, you kind of mentioned something, which I'll get to later, about, again, online learning. Everything is in the cloud. I think, people go to, edX or Coursera, Udemy. There's so many. So I think I want to get into that a little bit later. But so like, most students worry about like post-college, what am I going to do now? So concerned about jobs and everything, right? So from your experience, could you share, some advice, tips on internships, and or getting a tech job or landing at a major job at a company like, Microsoft, Amazon, or Google?
sure, yeah. Just even going before that, I think like if you go back to like you said, as an international student, most likely you will need a college degree to get a job here. Just purely from a company standpoint, though, actually, like they probably could care less about whether you have a degree or not, because all you're wanted to be is like good in engineering. So if you've got the aptitude, you're good. But because of the visa requirements, you kind of have to have a degree, right? So the first step comes from actually coming to getting your degree in the US, and which is already getting tougher and tougher because like
Yeah.
average 4-year school is like $70,000 per year without scholarship,
Yeah.
right? Which is extremely expensive, especially when scholarships are like really hard to get these days. And considering the fact that even if you got like a 50% scholarship, that's like $30,000 a year, and you're not allowed to work legally. So either you have that cash already, or it's difficult, and you can't get loans or anything like that. So like it's like a really tight spot. So then the other option tends to be to like go try to get into like a top school that has the endowment budget that can offer you scholarship. But those then tend to be really selective, right? Like Harvard's acceptance rate for like 2019-20 was like what, 5%, right? Like, so that's again, you're limiting yourself, the options you have. The other option I see that a lot of international students exercise is to go to um, uh, less selective school or transfer to a community college. But then there's also the thing that the quality of education or classes you have tends to usually be proportional to the amount of resources the school has. Not always, but then you'd have to do your due diligence to find like that niche school where all of their programs are pretty average, but the computer science program is pretty stellar. So like that's again very limited, right? So yeah, that's already a challenging part. But then after that, so let's go back to your actual question is, say you did well and you've got your education and stuff. And then when you do get a job, first they'll need to sponsor your visa, right? So you find a job, which is already challenging, then they have to sponsor you. And that the problem with sponsorship is this one tends to be proportional with the job market. So if the job market is not doing well, then you're struggling to get a job, then the visas are available, right? Like in 2008 or 2011, when the recession was there, you could get a H1B visa applied like all year because it was never full, right? Like, so anytime you get a job, they would sponsor you and you could immediately start working from October that year, right? But when the job market is doing well, any year from 2013 up to 2021, which is already starting for the applications, the quota is always exceeded, because I don't know if your students or watchers know this, but the quota is 65,000 for undergrad and 20,000 for masters, right? So that's a total of 85,000 visas that you can possibly get each year. But since 2013, that has almost always crossed over to 200,000, right? Like within a few days. So then now think of it, you came here, you spend 30, 40 grand, whatever, to get an education. You've got this dream job, like, say from Microsoft or whatever, right? And now you're in a state where it's going to be a lottery. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That's like a really sad situation to be in, right? Like everything that you've done for this one moment that's about to happen, and it suddenly goes to lottery, and you're like, bad luck. Doesn't matter at that point what job you have, what your GPA is, nothing, right? So that's already, it sounds very grim, but I think everyone should be aware of that at some point, regardless of how hard you work and how much you dedicate to everything, it may just be a pure function of luck, right? So that aside, if you want me, I can proceed with like the more details about getting a job, right? Is you're cool with that?
Yeah, thank you. That was very informative and detailed. So I think, would you suggest, since going to undergrad is so expensive, students pursuing just master's or graduate school, a lot shorter, right? It's still a degree, and then you still have a shot at the job application.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends, right? Like generally, unless you're doing like advanced like machine learning topics or artificial intelligence, like very analytical research driven projects, like you don't really need masters to work on most engineering jobs, right? Like, or even a degree, to be honest. Like most of the things I learned that I use on my day-to-day life is I learned on my own. Like really, like, I mean, I don't know what program you did in Loris, but like we had barely started this topic called trees in when my algorithms classes, data structures and algorithms ended, right? Like, so then you have to study about graph, you have to study about advanced algorithm. We never got there, but you can pick those up yourself. That's what I meant. But then without that degree, you can't get a job, but the degree doesn't really help you in terms of technical aspects. Like I said before, it helps you many other things. So it again becomes like, unless you are, this is my opinion again, unless you are like really academically curious and you want to learn about something, like like the theory behind computer science and all, a master's degree, even master's degree isn't cheap, right? Like at least you can get like teaching assistantships and stuff. So maybe that's a better one. It's at this point, because of the constraints that I just mentioned and all, it's like a toss up between whether it's worth it or not. But I mean, that depends on individual situation, right? Like I went through myself and somehow it worked out for me, but like I know many of my friends who had a great job but who just couldn't do it and had to go back home, so that's a sad situation. So what your particular situation is and how much of a risk tolerance you have and how you want to handle that, I mean, it depends on a case by case situation. But like, to be aware of the options. Yeah, you can do undergrads, but then you may not proceed because of the H1B situation. Then you may have to do masters. So do you have the budget or the timeline for that? And then if you do masters and then you can apply again, you can still run into the same problem. And then now your education is finished and you're done, right? Like, so be aware of all those options.
Definitely. I think it's very much individualized, I guess, right? It depends on your circumstance, situation, what you're looking for. I mean, I think, but like you said, I think you kind of need that as almost like a checklist. I mean, you need the degree. Does it have to be from the United States though? Like,
it doesn't.
Like Microsoft.
It doesn't. Honestly, like I said, like the companies themselves, if you know what you're doing and you've learned the stuff, you've worked on some amazing open source or your own projects, and you can demonstrate that you can succeed in a software engineering environment, degree is really irrelevant. Even the only time when it matters is when you're fresh out of college and you don't have work experience. So that's when you tend to look at, hey, which school did you went to? What were your curriculum like? What projects did you do? What classes did you take? Even then, that alone is not going to get you the job. You still have to go through the same technical interview that I will have to go through if I reapply to Microsoft, right? It's the same thing. Like no one really skips that. So as long as you can clear the assessment, the school part of things, it just probably helps you get the recruiter's attention, right? Like, hey, it
Mm-hmm.
looks like you went to a good school, did something, and then let's bring them in, right? Like, let's bring
Mm-hmm.
her in, like that kind of stuff. But once you're in the interview setting, like I said, I interviewed a lot. Like half of the times, it's an interviewing event. As an interviewer, it's just like one meeting on your calendar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like an average day, you go in the morning and then you review your day, like, hey, what meetings do I have? And then you notice, oh, I have an interview today. What position is this person interviewing for? That's all I care about. Like if it's, oh, level 2, level 3, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
when the interview starts, so many times, like because it's some days are so busy, I don't even have your resume with me. So for me,
Yeah.
it's like I have my set assessment that I do, and this is mostly true with everyone. You clear that, I'm convinced, like you may not even have a degree, I don't even know, right? So
That's, I mean, it's just interesting, like from the side of a student or a job applicant, I'm thinking is, you're serious, you want to put almost so much energy into it, and then but then, I mean, for the interviewer, it's just like, it's a lot of traffic going through, and then I think you really have to stand out, right?
yeah.
um and I think, I mean, just speaking of interview, like most interview, I think, at Microsoft or big giant companies, uh, they do have this phone first, and then there's an in-person or inside, right? Could you
Yes.
kind of elaborate on that?
Yes. So before I proceed through though, like this is very specific to like top tech companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Uber, Apple, like that kind of companies who
Mm-hmm.
have large volume of applicants, and
Mm-hmm.
they need to somehow figure out, and they've, after years of interviewing, they've like kind of all settled on this format where they found that this is like the best way to evaluate. It's still not the like most optimum way of evaluating anybody, but then it's hard to evaluate anyone and guarantee their success in 45 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is what they've settled to. But then if you, there are a lot of other software engineering jobs like smaller companies or startups that are looking to fill, they don't have like 1 year to get you trained, or they don't care which
Mm-hmm.
language do you use, right? Like they have
Mm-hmm.
a specific need to fill, and they will want like, hey, we are looking for a front end developer and our tool set is React and Node.js, right? So if you don't know that, you may not be interviewed because they need you to
Mm-hmm.
come and do that work right away. They can't
Mm-hmm.
spend 6 months in training you, right? Versus the
No.
bigger companies, they don't care about any of these, because as long as you've got the aptitude, they will train you, you will learn.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
idea, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
with that caveat, for Microsoft, you generally have like someone, a recruiter or someone will reach out to you. I wouldn't call this an interview, but I've known for them to ask you simple questions, just to see that if you know at least what you're doing. So they may ask
Mm-hmm.
some basic
Mm-hmm.
questions like, hey, so do you know about like object-oriented programming? Oh, what is inheritance? Or can you
Mm-hmm.
explain composition or polymorphism? That kind of stuff. It may be
Mm-hmm.
a little bit different, but I don't even know if the recruiters will actually have the technical knowledge to gauge you, but like they're just looking that, okay, this person can talk about at least bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
But that may not happen. If you already have a resume, then that's
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary. So then they'll talk about you, like see what your interests are. And usually every recruiter has like a few teams they hire for, and then they'll see if there's like a culture fit, right? Like that's a big thing too. Like, are you interested in these kind of things? If I just randomly ask you, what about Microsoft interests you? And then you say, yeah, especially like I've always liked the company, and especially after COVID, I love how Microsoft Teams has become so critical, something like that. And he's
Mm-hmm.
recruiting for teams. That's like a
Mm-hmm.
great sign, right? Like that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Look at your education and experience and stuff, and after that, if they like you, then they'll schedule you for a phone interview.
Mm-hmm.
um, 99.9%, again, this is going to be technical. There won't be much chit chat. Like the interviewer will probably come like, hey, my name's this, your name's this, okay, let's go on, here's the question, code it out. And usually happens in a whiteboard, or on a phone
Okay.
interview someone will share something that you can write code, and you just go through that on the phone,
Okay.
and that's it. And then after, if you clear that, then especially at Microsoft, generally you get flown over, if you don't live in the area, to the corporate headquarters or any other campus that you're
Yeah.
interviewing in. And then you have 5 more interviews.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are technical. And you usually get 3 interviews. And if you do well, you get 2 more.
I
But
see. Okay.
5 interviews, and I've briefly talked about that in my latest video.
Yes.
Is like there's 3 sections. Most of it is coding, problem solving. Second is behavioral, where they'll talk about like your challenges and trade-offs if you understand that. And then the third one is system design. System design is rarer for college students because they haven't really worked on large scale projects, so like they're not well versed. So you may not even get that. You may get 4 coding and 1 behavioral type. But for senior engineers, you will get more of system design because that's what you'll be doing mostly. I hope that answers your question.
Just, I think you did mention, I was watching a video and you mentioned something which I've heard it, but then I think I've never heard it from the perspective of an interviewer, right? I think kind of put that in a very interesting way, that you have to be kind of really honest. You can't be memorizing all your answers, because I think, a follow-up question will definitely mess things up, right? I mean, you kind of, I think you probably interview a lot of people, you kind of know whether they're telling a very genuine or honest story or not, right? So, I mean, could you elaborate on that and other interview tips that you think is important?
Yeah, so like interview in general is the interview process is intense and very difficult for most people. If you do it in a very structured and planned manner where you set it up properly and you have ways to evaluate yourself, you can do well. It's not matchable. Like I never went to a top school or anything like that, and it took me a while to learn that too, but it can be learned. But what I see most people do is, hey, what questions should I study? Or you can go to like, a lot of people go to places like glassdoor.com or some other websites where people share their interview experience, and they'll just list out, which you're not supposed to do. Actually, you signed an NDA when you interviewed. You're not supposed to tell people what you asked for, but people do it, especially when they get rejected. I suppose they share it. And then people pick out all those questions, and then now they've compiled like, 150 different questions that were legitimately asked at Microsoft, right? And then they just learn those. I mean, if you do it 2-3 times, you'll get the hang of it, right? But the problem with that is we don't have like, hey, here's a list of questions that you need to ask. Like I said, I used to randomly come up with a question on a project that I was working on, right? Like, so there's no way you know anything about that previously, right? So then the problem with memorizing is you could get lucky. For example, like you got the question and you didn't say it and you pretended to not know. And then I got convinced, say, for example, oh, this guy really struggled, but he did an awesome example, or she did a great thing. But then the next interviewer, you need to be extremely lucky to get 5 out of 5 that you've already seen, right? Like, so the next one is going to ask a question that you don't know, and then you'll have a completely different outlook towards it. You may struggle. So like the moment when everybody meets later and one interview gives you like, oh, excellent, they solved it, great job. And then the other one says, I don't think they knew what they were doing. It's like, well, how can that happen? That can't happen, right? Like that doesn't happen in real life. So that's how I was meaning that it'll go. And even just a follow-up question, like if an interviewer suspects that you already knew this, it's very easy to change the constraint to see that if you genuinely thought about it or you just memorized, right? Like if you memorize, then you'll get stuck pretty fast. And that's also generally a bad idea in engineering, because a lot of it is very context driven. It depends on things, right? Like to give a very brief example, say you're building a website, right? And then it's like Twitter, and that's the example I give. Say someone says, I want to build something like Twitter. So you ask like, oh, the basic oversimplified functionality is I want to be able to tweet something. And when I press tweet, it needs to not only show me, but on all of my followers' feeds or whatever that is, right? So then I say, if I told you, oh yeah, that's great. The tweet can show up in a day. As long as it shows up sometime on everyone's feeds that day, I'm good. How you approach building that problem is completely different. If I said it needs to be instant. The moment I press tweet, like Kai follows me and he needs to see it. It's like a completely different challenge, right? Like, so like if I ask you the first question and first question and you had somehow memorized it, I said, you know what, let's make it instant. I want the tweet to immediately show up. Now you're stuck, right? Like it's a completely different architecture. There's a lot of things you need to do to make it instant. Like resources are different. So that's the example I was talking about. It's very open-ended kind of question. So think of it as a discussion. Like it's really difficult to build that, because like the first thing is you're nervous in an interview because it always feels like someone's evaluating you, which is true in some ways. But if you can go in with the attitude where like, hey, this is a fellow software engineer, they already empathize with me, they're interviewing me, they've already gone through the process of except for like this rare 0.01% like genius person who just knows everything, like everyone went through the same process. So if you think of it that way, it gets away the nerves. And if you're not nervous and if you're just enjoying the process of talking to a fellow engineer, it goes much better. Even if you don't get know or get stuck, you can ask, like, hey, I don't know, can you give me a hint? That's fine. No one knows everything, right?
That's true. I think so. I think it's important to be true to yourself, and that to be true in
Yep.
your answers. And of course, I think we're not telling you to not to prepare for it. I think you should definitely prepare for your,
Absolutely.
you should anticipate some questions. So my fourth question, obviously, this is kind of a very broad, kind of a macro level, I guess. So for tech workers in Burma or in Asia in general, right? So like, what do you want to say?
So in general, I think the reason I think tech is becoming so popular all over the world is because, like, for example, what I can build or what I can come up with, sitting in Seattle working at Microsoft with all my resources, like, and what you can do or what someone else can do from Burma with a basic computer and access to internet with limited resources is not that much different. You can build anything from everywhere. So I think a lot of times we get obsessed about a specific company or a specific place, or Silicon Valley is like the birthplace for all great companies. I need to go to Silicon Valley to be able to um, build something, right? Like that. I think that's a flawed idea. I mean, yes, if you are already in Silicon Valley, you probably are surrounded by people who are like-minded, technological, entrepreneurial. That helps, but just because you aren't in Silicon Valley, like, shouldn't stop you from building as a software engineer, right? Like, gather a few friends. Like, it's a very lonely thing if you just do it yourself, because it's kind of like, it's not very exciting in many ways, right? Like, it's exciting to me, but when you look at it from an outside, or you're sitting quietly all day writing code, it tends to be very lonely. But it doesn't have to be like, that's not how it is in real life. Like, gather a few friends, make it fun. Like, I don't know what you do for fun, like put on a movie, may do a hackathon project, build something that everybody
I do cooking.
is yeah, cook something, drink beer, I don't know, like drink coffee, like whatever works for you, make it fun, and build something. Like, and another thing to add to that is, like, we're always looking for something epic to build, right? It has to be the next startup, it has to be the next million. It doesn't, honestly. Like, to become a software engineer, just solve something that build something that solves your or a couple of friends' needs, right? Like, chances are that if you do that enough, there are many other people who have the same issues, right? Like, for example, if you wanted, like, to-do list is like a common beaten example, right? Everybody builds a to-do list as their first project. But maybe there's a valid reason. Maybe you use a lot of to-do lists and you're always wondering, I wish this had that, I wish that. I need like 5 different app have 5 different features, but you wish it was in one app, right? As a software engineer, you can go build that, like, build it for yourself. Maybe many other people think that it's the same thing and nobody does it, right? And if nothing, you learn how to build a software project end to end, right? So that's my main advice: is don't wait for like a big job or like a to be somewhere in some certain opportunities. Like, if you already have most likely what it needs to build software, and with everything on the cloud, if you can afford a few dollars here and there, you can even experiment with like cheap cloud services and stuff like that. Storage is cheap. So it's not that bad. Like, just go do it. Like, people give me the same advice with the YouTube channel. I was always waiting for this. Oh no, but I need a better camera. Oh, I need this, but I need to practice. And then a few
Yeah.
friends that have YouTube is like, you know what, just make your video.
Just start. Yeah.
Yeah. The same thing with engineering. It's very few people can have a profession that they can build almost like art, right? Like, the artists, they just need a canvas, imagination, and a few tools, and you can make art anywhere, right? Very few people can do that. Like, for example, if you talk about like accounting, right? Like, you can do your own accounting, but then that's that. Like, you can't get that creative with it, right? Like, you need clients, you need challenges. It's not like that with engineering. So I think you should take advantage of that situation, how much freedom and creativity you have. That's my advice.
Awesome. That's very inspiring. I mean, it's speaking of like, just like, learning things on your own, right? Initiating things, self-learning, right? I think today, if you look at it, there are a lot of, free courses online from MIT, Harvard, even some major, universities. So your thoughts on educational technology and then post-COVID learning and working in general?
Yeah, for online learning, I mean, yes, especially with COVID and stuff, it's improved a great deal. Um, but not only that, I think the move was started long time ago. Like, say, especially in tech, like, everything's mostly remote. You can communicate with the advancement in like Teams and Zoom and, like Facebook Messenger and that kind of stuff. um, with courses too, like there was a movement, I think it started around 2005, like I think MIT started it, calling it MIT Open Course, where I learned a lot of topics, like a lot of my review topics and stuff from like this guy called Eric Demain. He's a brilliant professor at MIT, right? Everything's online, like you can pick your course, even like unless you want certification for some reason, like even paying for Coursera or Udacity isn't necessary. Only it's in YouTube, like literally full courses of, you can be a computer scientist just watching YouTube videos, so that's amazing. And I think like more and more companies will be more open to remote work or remote teaching in remote learning after, especially the COVID situation. So that's great. And I mean, if you have like young entrepreneurial type watchers or viewers, that's a great opportunity for them. That's a great space right now, right? Online learning. That you can improve on. I'm sure every problem creates an opportunity, right? Like, so COVID has created a lot of opportunities already.
Definitely. I mean, for teachers or students, any, useful resource that you could, I know, some school district use like Microsoft Team. We use Google Classroom and stuff like that. Any resource that you think it's kind of will be helpful for students or teachers?
Resources, I think it's hard to say if there's like one tool, because I'm not in the teaching space, so I'm not too familiar with the tools that already exist there, and how things like Blackboard and eLearn and all the academic portals have improved over the years. But I think in general, this is probably, it's probably not a bit of advice, but I think it's like a great wake up call for like teachers and students alike to definitely, regardless of what you're studying, you may be a sociology student or teacher, to be somehow in tune with technology and learn the basics of like video conferencing, have everything online, not on paper, like that kind of stuff. Like I remember in our school, everything was like printed out, handed out, like submitting was written, so like kind of get away from that, learn the tools. I think that's the best thing to do, at least to stay current and be part of this new world we live in now.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure if you ever thought of this, but one of the questions that I always have, with online learning is the assessment. How do you make it credible? Like, how do you? I think again, kind of going into, I think you still need that human touch, that in-person learning. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. There's no replacement for human on human communication and interaction, right? Even like remote, like working from remote, for us, like it wasn't always an option, but like once it was forced on you and you have to work day in day out every day, and it suddenly started becoming like, hey, this sounded great in theory, but it's not that great in practice, because I loved walking into someone's room and saying, hey, I have this question, let's chat about it quickly, or draw something on the whiteboard. Now everything has to be a meeting, right? I need to set it up, I don't know what they're doing on their side, I need to ask, and it's not the same. It may work for someone. It depends, right? Like maybe it's for some people that have a new baby, or that had an incredibly difficult commute, this is like magic, right? Like it's amazing. But for some people that live near work or like interacting, same with education, right? Like it's probably great. It's probably not that good, but I think it's a balance. I think it works, but it doesn't work at the same time, and hopefully in the future, like companies and schools kind of learn that balance and flexibility, right? Like, hey, if you want to be remote, you can, but we also have classes if you want to come to class. If you want like have anything different based on like, like attending classes, like participation points was like a huge thing when I was going, and I never attended class. I don't know why, I used to miss classes. So that was always pain. But if they're all remote, I'd probably like attend most of them, like it's just like it's 3 feet of snow, like 8 in the morning, that kind of stuff. So I'd
I
love to have
agree.
that flexibility.
At times I agree with you. And actually,
Attend classes. I'm not telling you to don't attend classes.
No, I hear you. But yeah, I was just going to share my story about like, when this COVID thing happened, everything went online, we started teaching, and then some kids that weren't doing well, actually, they were starting to do really well. So I think they were finding their niche, I guess. I think, for some students, I would say 20% of them, they love it, especially if they are not very comfortable with the social life that school gives you, a lot of kids struggle, have anxiety coming to school. So I think it's great for some students like that. But I mean,
Absolutely.
like you're saying, I think we need a balance. And it looks like, a lot of school district, when we open in the fall, looks like we'll be going into a hybrid model, like, 2 days online,
Yeah.
2 days in school and 3 days online, something like that. So it looks like that's where we're going. Well, my final thoughts, and along with that, if you want to, if you could include your, because I watched a video and then towards the end, you said a very motivational story about rejection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you could share with that.
Oh yeah, I think your story you're referring to is like me applying to a bunch of companies.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and this ties back, and I wanted to say that in my video too, but my video is already getting like 40 minutes long, so I had to compress it. But the idea was, I think we are very bad at self-assessment. And
Mhm,
I've read this in psychology too. It's called I forgot the exact term, but it's a false sense of competence, right? Like, because you went to school, you graduated, that's great, but we don't sit back and reflect, okay, I've graduated, what is it that is necessary for me to succeed in school? Like, hopefully you do that even before you graduate. What do I need? Do I like, am I required to have a few internships? What's the process? Because we are made to believe that just because we went to school and we had a great GPA, like everything's smooth sailing from there, right? You just get
mhm,
the job
mhm,
offers and
mhm,
interview, the companies would love to have that. But then when you
mhm,
get out, and that's what happened to me, I'm like, okay, what are the tech companies? Like, the fact that I had to Google all the list of tech companies shows how unprepared I was then, right? Like, so then I
mhm,
just
mhm,
went to the career website, just sent my resume to all of them, didn't even know how to make a resume, and naturally never heard back from anybody. Like, not even like, your automated email about thanks for submitting, that kind of stuff came in, but
mhm,
no one responded, didn't even have an interview. So like, it's not even rejection, right? Like, nobody even cared. That was that bad, but then that's again the false sense of competence, right? Like, I thought because I cleared school and I had a good GPA, I have a computer science
mhm,
degree, I have a math minor,
mhm,
I should just get jobs. But that's
mhm,
not true. Like, once you realize how much competition there is, and they get like millions of
mhm,
applications each year, and you didn't set yourself apart or you didn't try hard, it's difficult, right? Like, for me, it was that
mhm,
I got rejected. Then I did briefly some other stuff. Then I went for masters, and then I learned a little bit more about the process. Then I think after masters, I applied for like 40 or 39 or 40 companies,
mhm,
and then heard back from like, I think 6 or 7 companies, interviewed for them, got one offer, got rejected in all of those. Um, and then took that job, worked there for a while, and then learned some more, right, like about jobs and interviews and all that. And then I think it took that long for me to realize that, hey, you need to really prep and work hard and understand what you want doing if you want to apply to companies like Microsoft and Amazon or Google, right?
mhm,
So I think it took me that long to like attempts and trying and understanding. And then that time I really prepped hard and I took it really seriously. I kind of knew what was required, and I applied to Amazon and Microsoft, and I got an offer from Microsoft, and I took that.
mhm.
So that's that. And then I got into interviewing. Then I understood even more. Oh, okay. And then now when I reflect at me applying at 57 companies, like, no, that wouldn't have worked, like, it just goes to the void because like so many people apply, right? Like, how to, like, that's also like part of why I made that video, is like, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, so it's like,
Right,
if no one
definitely.
tells you, you don't know, you think you've done the best thing that you know, right?
Self-assessment, being self-critical is so important. So just,
Absolutely.
like you probably have a mantra or some sort of a quote that you live by. Could you share that with us, the final words?
I don't. Wow, like, I should have written something epic, but I don't have a mantra. If there is a mantra, I'll tell you that I am no different, or anybody that works at Google or
Mhm,
Facebook, Microsoft is no different than anybody that's watching your channel.
mhm,
We all
mhm,
struggle through the same, like, eventually I'll have to get a job and I'll have to go through the same problems. Being an interviewer, interviewing
mhm,
completely two things. I'll have the nerves,
mhm,
I'll have to do the same prep. So just
mhm,
know that everybody does the same thing. And the best thing to do is, I always start from a point where I just assume that I'm not good enough. That works for me. And I prep harder because I think,
mhm,
and then usually when I interview, it's like, oh, okay, that wasn't that bad, versus you thinking that you're really good and then getting a big shock when things happen. So
mhm,
like,
mhm,
that's one. And I am usually obsessed about like time management and how I spend my time, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
really good with assessing myself. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's why I kind of mentioned like a lot of people just like solve problems endlessly and hope that they just know everything, and
Mm-hmm.
again lack of assessing yourself, right? Like I've done this
Mm-hmm.
problem for 5 days and my speed isn't improving. Like why is it not improving? Though I think
Mm-hmm.
like that metacognition is pretty important. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're always trying to improve, you're progressing, you have goals you've set, and you're being smart about how you get them, I think you'll do well. Don't
Awesome.
stress out. Enjoy the process. We get too stressed out in life.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, what an inspiring story. And thank you so much for doing this interview itself.
No problem.
So thank you. And
You're
I
welcome.
hope you're doing well. Be safe out there.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to all your videos, things that you're going to be accomplishing in the future. I mean, I know you're going great places. So
Thank you.
again, thank you. And you have a wonderful rest of the day. It's up.
You too. You too.
All
Thanks.
right. All right. Take care.